All right, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, thousands of Nisi, which are the Japanese Americans, were basically arrested and put into concentration camps by the United States government. This should have never happened, folks. These were American citizens. And just because we were angry about the Japanese attacking us at Pearl Harbor, we threw them into concentration camps. Now, their concentration camps are not nearly anything like Hitler's concentration camps or Stalin's Gulag, okay? They got 3 meals a day, the kids got to go to school, and families got to stay together during that time. Racial prejudice and war hysteria were the primary reasons for the government's actions at this time. In 1988, President Reagan apologized to the Nisi, and that was basically the end of that. Okay? All right. European and African theater. So this war is so big that there's 3 different wars going on simultaneously. We have the European theater. Theater means area of war. Africa theater, and we have the Pacific. Okay? So Dwight Eisenhower leads the Allied army against the Germans in northern Africa. At first, he's eventually going to be promoted and given the reins whenever we're going after Hitler after D-Day, or during D-Day and after. British General Bernard Montgomery, they called him Monty, defeats German Erwin Rommel at the Battle of El Alamein, okay, for control of Egypt. Germany begins to retreat in 1942. On the Eastern Front, that is with the war between Russia and Germany, we have Operation Barbarossa. Remember a couple of videos ago I talked about how Hitler and Stalin signed a non-aggression pact. Well, Hitler heard that Stalin was going to break the pact, so Hitler invaded Russia before Stalin could do the same thing. We have the big battle of Stalingrad, folks. This is the largest battle in human history. Over 1.5 million people dead because of this one battle. And it happened in Russia, and basically what happened was the Germans were outside the city of Stalingrad freezing to death. The Russians were inside the city of Stalingrad starving to death because the Germans had surrounded them. But the Germans are going to lose this one because they were not prepared for the Russian winter. The Battle of Kursk, 1943, was the largest tank battle of the war. Russia stops Germany and begins to push Germany back on the Eastern Front. All right, moving on. The Western Front. Now we're talking about Europe. Okay, Erwin Rommel had been given the task of constructing Fortress Europe to stop an Allied invasion of France from Britain. Okay, so they're fortifying the coast of France all the way around. Okay. Dwight Eisenhower led the forces to retake France at D-Day. So what happened was Hitler thought that George Patton, the tank commander, had been fired because he slapped a soldier. So we used that knowledge there to fool Hitler. So we took Patton and we sent him to England, and he created this balloon army. It's an army of nothing but balloons. And they made Hitler think that the Allies were going to attack at a place called, Port de Calais, okay, in France. But in fact, the real invasion is going to be 200 miles to the southwest at a place called Normandy, France. And so Hitler takes all of his men and puts them at Port de Calais, and we invaded Normandy, giving us a foothold on the northern part of Europe. All right, how did the Allies establish a base on the European continent during World War II? That looks good right there. They invaded northern France by sea from Britain. This is called D-Day. This is called Operation Overlord as well. All right, moving on. George Patton is America's best tank commander, and he stops the Germans at the Battle of the Bulge, and the Allies can now enter Germany. Americans wait for Russia to enter Berlin at that time. And by the way, the Germans, they were running in some cases to actually surrender to the Americans, so that way they wouldn't have to surrender to the Soviets, because they knew that if they surrendered to the Soviets, they were probably going to die in a prisoner of war camp, and they knew the Americans would treat them better. Harry Truman becomes president at this time, because FDR dies, and Truman now has to wrap up all of World War II. Well, what he does first is he gets that Victory in Europe Day, okay? VE Day, that's what it's called. And then he has to go and deal with the victory in the Pacific. But right before VE Day, we have the Yalta Conference while FDR is still alive. We were worried, okay, Churchill and Roosevelt were worried that if Stalin conquered Europe by himself, that he would just keep it, and therefore Stalin would become the next Hitler. So we made a deal with Stalin, and what Yalta Conference basically said was that Russia could conquer they could have all the land they could conquer by the end of the war, so long as they don't go any farther than that, okay? And so they met at Yalta to develop post-war plans for Europe, and hopefully to keep it out of the hands of the Soviets. Okay, as they went into Germany, they found that the Holocaust was a very real thing. 13 million people died in the Holocaust, and 6 million of those were Jews at the time. Most Germans had no idea what was actually going on with the Holocaust. Nazi policies and the Holocaust had a profound impact later after the war by bringing more attention to the issue of racism in the United States of America. So black men had fought for this for the world, okay? And they beat the biggest racist in history, which is Adolf Hitler. And when they got back home, though, they were still called the N-word. They were still not allowed to go to school with white people and stuff like that. So in many ways, the defeat of Hitler in World War II led to the Civil Rights Act of the 1950s and 60s. All right, here we go. What was the main purpose of the Yalta Conference held during World War II? And that is going to be to develop post-war plans for Europe. We're going to give Stalin all of that land that he can conquer so long as he stops after the war is over. 72. The Nazi policies and Holocaust during World War II influenced the culture of the U.S. by, it's going to be the one about racism. Here we go. Bringing more attention to issues of racism. Absolutely. All right, in the Pacific Theater, we still have to defeat Japan. Douglas MacArthur is trying to do that, very much so. He retakes the Philippines, and then he sets his eyes on the mainland of Japan. MacArthur wants to invade by sea, just like we did at D-Day. Well, Harry Truman, the new president of the United States, basically instead of doing that, they dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, so let's read this right here. Japan would make two serious strategic mistakes. They underestimated the time that it would take for the U.S. to counterattack, and they failed to realize the U.S. code breakers could read their communications. We broke their code. Okay, that's how we knew that they were coming to Midway, and that's how we crushed them. This help led to two major important defensive victories. The Battle of Coral Sea, where the Allies stopped the Japanese attack on Australia, and the Battle of Midway, which is the turning point in the Pacific. This is where we started to win. Okay, so here we go. What was the significance of the Battle of Midway during World War II? Okay, A looks pretty good. Okay, it was the battle that caused Germany to surrender. No, that's the Japanese we're talking about. It was one of the only battles that did not use bombers. Not true. It was the battle in which the U.S. did not suffer any military. No. Okay. All right, guys, it's going to be A right there. It assured Americans' position of naval power in the Pacific. That means that America started winning in the Pacific. A couple of other battles here. We have Guadalcanal. This is the first major victory in the war in the Pacific, but we lost a few after that, so it's not the turning point in the Pacific. Okay. Admiral Chester Nimitz and Hazley launched an island hopping campaign against Japan. So earlier in the war, the strategy was to hop from one island to another, to another, to another, until you hit the Japanese mainland. But we ended up not using this in the end. We used it all throughout the war. Island hopping was our main strategy against the Japanese. But it's not what ended the war. What ended the war is going to be the nuclear bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, that all came from the Manhattan Project. And so after the second bomb was dropped, we basically asked the Japanese if they want to surrender, and they did, and World War II was over. This is called VJ Day, September 1945. Japan surrenders and the war ends.